This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Pick up a new skill or just learn more about things like science, math, engineering, computer science, and so much more thanks to Brilliant's accessible and interactive courses. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/skillup or click the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Gamers! Absolutely stacked show this week, so let's dispense with the intro and get straight into the news. It's never been more over for the Suicide Squad. That's a sentence I never thought I'd say because it felt impossible that things could get any worse than the disappointing launch state of the game or the patch that followed some weeks after that rendered it unplayable for many people. But against all odds, Warner Bros. And Rocksteady have found all new ways to disappoint the 14 people still playing this video game. I'm talking, of course, about the launch of Season 1, which happened just last week across all platforms. This is a big one. If you've been tracking the Suicide Squad subreddit as I have, that place has been running on copium since day dot, with many true believers holding firm to the hope that Season 1 would magically fix all of the game's problems. They're like Bart in that Camp Krusty episode where they're chanting, "Krusty is coming," only instead of Krusty, it's the Joker, and instead of the Joker, it's just Barney in a clown suit. Season 1 is headlined by the Joker, an all-new rendition courtesy of some multiverse shenanigans. With so much riding on that character, you really want to nail a compelling rendition of him, and I'm not sure that this is it.
I killed my team because I truly cared about them. And even though I've only just gotten to know you guys, I care about you that much too.
And look, to be honest, I feel bad for Rocksteady in this regard. When you're trying to find a take on a character who's been played by Mark Hamill, Heath Ledger, Jack Nicholson, and of course, the legendary Jared Leto, it's hard to compete. Don't worry though, if the Joker isn't hitting right for you, there's still plenty of other stuff to enjoy in Season 1, including... there's a new Brainiac boss battle. It's just a reskin of the Green Lantern encounter the same way that the first Brainiac boss battle was a reskin of the Flash boss battle, but hey, content is content. Outside of that, there's basically nothing. No story missions, no new grindable mission types. There's some new modifiers that kick in on the existing content, many of which actively make the game more frustrating to play because of how they limit damage types or make enemies more bullet spongy. It's just grind 20 or so missions to unlock the Joker, watch a 90-second cutscene with him, and then get back to grinding the same shit as before. This obviously has not gone over well with anyone. In terms of lapsed players, the update has done almost nothing to move the player count needle. The game did spike to around 3,000 concurrent players when the update dropped, but with so little content on offer, that player count is dropping like a stone, and in less than 4 days that number has already halved. More concerning is the game's subreddit, at one point the last bastion of hope for this game. Over there, they have had jack of it, with hundreds of angry threads all venting their frustration and disappointment, and an update so anemic that it feels like Warner Bros. And Rocksteady have taken this community for a ride. And like, yeah, I mean, that's the promise inherent in every live service. It's stick with us. We will reward you for the time and money you've invested. But when a game charges $70 and change and isn't even finished, and then dangles the hope of more content in Season 1, only for that content to be MIA, you can understand how people get mad. And as I said in my own review, I think the problems with Suicide Squad run much deeper than its content offering or character roster. The core building blocks of this gameplay loop are not where they need to be in order to sustain a live service. Gunplay, character kits, enemy design and diversity, map design, UI, all of it needs a massive amount of overhaul, and given how poorly the game is performing, there is no way in hell that Warner Bros. Are going to be greenlighting the budget required to overhaul this video game. I still think we're going to get around 4 seasons of content for this one before Warner Bros. Pulls the plug. It's sad, but if it means that Rocksteady can get off this thing and get back to making great single-player games, then that'll at least be some silver lining. Pivoting to Xbox news now, you remember last week GamesIndustry.biz reported on chatter they heard on the floor of GDC, where developers are becoming a little disillusioned with the current state of Xbox, particularly its console hardware, which is clearly running a distant third place behind PS5 and Switch. Well, while all that chatter was happening at GDC, Xbox boss Phil Spencer was there on the show floor, and he took an interview with Polygon that is pretty essential reading if you follow this industry. I'll leave a link to it below the like button. By far and away the biggest headline coming out of that interview was Phil's comments on the recent layoffs that he enacted earlier this year, cutting 1,900 jobs after spending $69 billion to acquire the developers of Bubble Witch Saga, Crash Team Rumble, and Overwatch 2. Phil argued that after dropping that amount of cash, he had no choice but to lay off 1,900 people, and it wasn't because of anything to do with Xbox, their strategy, their performance, or their growth. It was entirely about macroeconomic forces completely beyond Phil's control. Quote, "The thing that has me most concerned for the industry is the lack of growth. And when you have an industry that is projected to be smaller next year in terms of players and dollars, and you get a lot of publicly traded companies that are in the industry that have to show their investors growth, because why else does somebody own a share of someone's stock if it's not going to grow? The side of the business that then gets scrutinized is the cost side, because if you're not going to grow the revenue side, then the cost side becomes challenged. We're a business. I've said over and over, I don't get any luxury of not having to run a profitable, growing business inside of Microsoft," end quote. Hearing Phil talk this way is weird because it really sounds as though he's abdicating all of the agency he had in this equation. The reality is that during Phil Spencer's tenure, Xbox has not delivered the library of games that would grow their business. They put every foot right except the most important one. They had a great console at a great price, including a cheaper entry point in the Series S. They acquired a number of studios with great potential. They had Game Pass, which is without a doubt the single best deal in video games and a powerful value proposition for those considering purchasing a console. They had it all, right? But what of Halo? What of Redfall? What of Starfield? Where is the Xbox equivalent of God of War, or Spider-Man, or Ghost of Tsushima, or even Helldivers 2? Where are the games that are so good that they make me want to buy an Xbox or spend more time in that ecosystem? I'm not saying Xbox doesn't have any games. I love Forza Horizon and Hi-Fi Rush and Grounded, but it really does feel like we've been waiting over a generation and a half for Xbox to deliver a true system seller, and it hasn't happened yet. It's reductive, but take a look at Capcom's stock price over the last 5 years. That's around the time that Capcom's renaissance began with Monster Hunter World, Devil May Cry 5, the Resident Evil remakes, Street Fighter getting its groove back last year, and Dragon's Dogma selling gangbusters just last month. Their stock price is up 400% over 5 years. You know why? Good video games. Nintendo is the same. The Wii U sold like 18 units total. It was the biggest disaster in Nintendo history since that creepy Zelda cartoon. Nintendo's stock price has doubled since the launch of the Switch, and just recently it passed an all-time high. Nintendo are now staring down the barrel of a successful movie business, they already have a successful foothold in theme parks, and they're about to release the Switch 2 next year, a console we are all going to buy because Nintendo make extraordinary video games that you can't play anywhere else. And that's a really important point, because in that same interview, Phil Spencer again spoke about Xbox's evolving position on platform exclusivity. He spoke about it in the context of game development costs first. Quote, "The case for exclusivity gets pressured as the cost of the game goes up," end quote. It's another example of Phil subtly or not so subtly hinting that more and more Xbox stuff is going to go multi-platform in the future. And not for nothing, but Xbox are just about to make 4 of their best exclusives for this current generation multi-platform, those being Pentiment, Grounded, Sea of Thieves, and Hi-Fi Rush. Those aren't system sellers by any stretch of the imagination, but they're great games, and having them available elsewhere erodes the unique value proposition that Microsoft have been trying to cultivate since Bill Gates walked out onto that stage all those years ago. In addition to those comments about exclusivity affecting budgeting decisions, Phil also commented that ballooning development costs endanger creativity. Quote, "The cost really reduces the risk that publishers are willing to take. If you're a publisher, you know that's a pretty big number in a world that already has a lot of video games coming. How are you going to establish this thing? Am I willing to take the red on new IP, on a new kind of game, when the earn-out risk is that high? I think it impinges on the creativity of this industry, which I don't love. Creativity is like the cornerstone of what we should be about in gaming," end quote. Now, all of that is true, except he's leaving out the part where he's the one that decides if the budgets are approved. He is that publisher that he is talking about here. Again, where is his agency in this equation? Why isn't he proudly declaring that Xbox is going to be the publisher that will make the risky bet in the name of creativity? Microsoft literally has more money than every single other publisher combined. So if it's not them willing to take these risks, then who is it? And then there's some really weird shit at the back end of this, like the possibility of the Epic Games Store coming to the Xbox console. For real. In the same interview, Phil Spencer was asked if he could ever see other storefronts like the Epic Store or itch.io arriving on Xbox consoles. Here's what he had to say, quote, "Yes, consider our history as the Windows company. Nobody would blink twice if I said, hey, when you're using a PC, you get to decide the type of experience you have by picking where to buy your games. There's real value in that," end quote. He go on to talk about how the business model of selling consoles cheap to recoup costs down the line is under threat, and that he doesn't feel like it's growing the industry at this point. He then go on to say that the PC experience is the ideal end state when it comes to platform openness, using Sea of Thieves as an example where players shouldn't have to worry about which hardware or platform their friends are playing on. Quote, "If I want to play on a gaming PC, then I feel like I'm a more continuous part of a gaming ecosystem as a whole. As opposed to on console, my gaming is kind of shared, to use a term, based on these different closed ecosystems that I have to play across," end quote. So I think this interview was remarkable because you've got Phil Spencer blaming macroeconomic forces for his decision to sack 1,900 people, even though he just dropped $70 billion on a publisher. You've got more evidence that Xbox are plotting a multi-platform course despite a business update 1 month ago where they say they're not making a substantial change to their exclusive strategy. You've got Microsoft, a $3 trillion company, lamenting the high cost of game development, and you've got Phil Spencer suggesting that over the next few years, your Xbox is basically going to become a PC and you'll be able to buy games from the Epic Games storefront on it rather than from Microsoft themselves. I'll be real with you guys, it's my job to understand what's going on in this industry, but I have no idea what Xbox's strategy is at this point. It just seems to be a little bit of everything that ultimately amounts to a whole lot of nothing. You want to make Xbox a PC? You thought competing with Sony was tough? Good luck competing with Valve, an organization with endless money, nothing to spend it on, zero overhead, and a leader who doesn't give a fuck about pleasing shareholders because he doesn't have any. Gabe will gladly put Steam on your console if you let him, and laugh as he does it, because who the fuck ever bought a game from the Windows storefront when they didn't have to? At this point, I'm pretty certain that Microsoft are planning to become a third-party publisher that also has a modest hardware footprint. And it's like, if that's the plan, just say it, because right now, every new thing we hear from Microsoft seems to invite only more confusion. I'm not sure when this era of doublespeak and flip-flopping will end, but I hope it ends soon because it really feels like the Xbox brand has suffered some major blows over the last few months, and talk of putting the Epic Games Store on your console is not going to flip that narrative. Anyway, that was a lot, wasn't it? So, what else happened in the news this week? Gearbox has a new owner, and it's kind of like their old owner, sort of. Up until a little while ago, Gearbox was an independent studio that had a publishing agreement with 2K Games. 2 years ago though, Gearbox sold itself to Embracer Group for a deal worth a total of $1.3 billion, but $363 million of that was for upfront cash and stock. The rest was promised cash and stock dependent on Gearbox hitting various performance milestones. After that, Embracer's financing deal with the Saudis went belly up, leaving them with a mountain of debt and absolutely no way to repay it. At that point, the cost cutting began, with Embracer Group cancelling projects, sacking workers, and closing studios, some of which would have been able to survive were they not more useful to Embracer Group as a tax write-off. The two biggest holdings in Embracer Group's portfolio were Saber Interactive and Gearbox. Saber was sold just a few weeks back to an independent consortium led by one of the Saber co-founders. This week, Gearbox was sold to 2K Games for $460 million, all of it paid in Take-Two shares, the parent company of 2K Games. It's a bit tricksy in terms of how it breaks, since Embracer will keep some of Gearbox's publishing properties, namely the rights to the successful Remnant franchise, the upcoming Hyperlight Breaker, as well as 3 studios, Cryptic, Lost Boys Interactive, and Captured Dimensions. Randy Pitchford put out a surprisingly normal statement on the matter, saying, quote, "We set the bar for interactive entertainment and achieved remarkable results with groundbreaking, record-setting games when we work together at arm's length as partners. I'm incredibly excited about what we can accomplish now that we are fully aligned as one," end quote. And look, I don't have much love for 2K, but in their defense, they've done a good job letting Gearbox get on with it, keeping the Borderlands franchise free of the in-game spending that has come to define most looters. Will that also be the case for the upcoming Borderlands 4? Let's hope so. It's nice to see at least one AAA looter shooter bucking a trend that has become all but ubiquitous. Speaking of looters, Bungie managed one of the most successful in the business, but they're also developing an extraction shooter, and it seems like there's a shakeup going on with how that game is coming together. This is a story I didn't have time to cover last week, but IGN reported, quote, Bungie is in the midst of shifting around its creative leadership on Marathon, including removing longtime Bungie designer Christopher Barrett from the game director role. IGN learned he's being replaced by former Valorant game director Joe Ziegler, who left Riot Games for Bungie in 2022, end quote. That is a surprise, as Barrett, a Destiny veteran, was on Marathon from the beginning, at least as far as we know. People leave or are removed from these sorts of leadership positions for all sorts of reasons, so we really can't speculate as to why this happened. What is possible though, according to IGN, is that pressure is on and Marathon is undergoing some changes. Quote, sources tell IGN that Bungie is pouring resources into getting Marathon out the door. The game's direction has shifted somewhat under Ziegler's new leadership, one source says, including moving away from custom player characters in favor of a selectable cast of heroes, end quote. That last point was met with a huge amount of dissatisfaction online. The idea of an extraction shooter doesn't much appeal to Bungie's core fanbase, but if you could at least create and build your own character, then that's something that might appeal to your average Destiny player. Selectable heroes though? That isn't ringing anyone's bells. Having said all of that, Ziegler was the game director for Valorant, a game that came out of nowhere and is now going toe-to-toe with Counter-Strike in the tactical shooter space, with a particularly strong appeal in the 15 to 25 age bracket, which has been notoriously tough to crack. This person has literally done what Bungie are trying to do with Marathon, so it'd probably be wise to give them the benefit of the doubt until we see Marathon for ourselves. Speaking of reboots and reshuffles, Riot popped up last week to give an update on their MMO, which has been in development since the last Ice Age. Unfortunately, the news is not good, at least if you are hoping to play it before the next Ice Age. Riot co-founder Mark Merrill took to Twitter to say, quote, after a lot of reflection and discussion, we've decided to reset the direction of the project some time ago. This decision wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The initial vision just wasn't different enough from what you can play today. We don't believe you want to play an MMO that you've already played before with a Runeterra coat of paint. To truly do justice to the potential of Runeterra and to meet the incredibly high expectations of players around the world, we need to do something that truly feels like a significant evolution of the genre, end quote. That statement does come sometime after the former project's lead, Greg Street, aka Ghostcrawler, left the project to begin work on his own MMO at his own studio. Again, can't speculate as to how all these pieces fit together, but bottom line, the Riot MMO is still alive, but will we be by the time it gets released? That remains to be seen. A quick lightning round to finish off. A new webinar has entered the scene. The III Initiative is a collective consisting of the developers of games like Dead Cells, Darkest Dungeon, Vampire Survivors, and plenty more. It's a showcase designed to highlight indie games with over 30 on display. They're describing it as a, quote, straight-to-the-point show packed with announcements as a collective of studios to speak directly to players with no hosting segments, no advertisements, no sponsorships, no extra fluff, just games, end quote. Jeff Keighley looking visibly confused after reading that last line. PlayStation are about to add a hint system to select PS5 games. The system is opt-in and will allow your PS5 to record footage of you doing stuff, with those videos then being uploaded and reviewed by a moderator. You can then pull up one of these videos if you ever find yourself getting stuck, meaning that hopefully you'll need to spend less time perusing game sites or YouTube guides. The system is free to all, meaning you won't need a PS Plus subscription, and it's being rolled out in select games right now. Kinda cool, to be honest. Remedy just put out some very limited details about what to expect from their upcoming co-op shooter set in the Control universe. It comes courtesy of their annual report, and it reads thusly, quote, after the Hiss invasion, the oldest house is under lockdown, a boiling pot of volatile and dangerous supernatural forces. Trapped within is the last vestige of the Federal Bureau of Control, who will need to take a stand and push back to regain control. Desperate times require desperate measures, and everyone is needed, end quote. They describe it as a service-based, fixed-price game, which they define as, quote, premium games that may have a lower initial price point, but a long tail of revenue through updates, game expansions, and potentially microtransactions, end quote. So basically like Helldivers 2, only with the hiss. I am very okay with the sound of that. Time for some studio news. Some of it good, most of it not. On the good end of the spectrum is the formation of a new studio. It's called Lunacy Games, and it's led by Bill Roper, who was a producer for both Warcraft 1 and 2, and Diablo 1 and 2. Interestingly, they're working on a new Hellgate game titled Hellgate Redemption. Been a long time since that franchise has seen an outing, so it's nice to see it back in the mix. French studio Dontnod has announced that they're restructuring their operations, but it doesn't seem to be in the name of job cutting. Rather, they're reorganizing their studio around three core genres: RPG, narrative adventure, and action adventure. This makes a lot of sense for a studio that in the last few years alone has shipped a huge variety of genres, from the narrative-led Life is Strange to the action-led Banisher's Ghosts of New Eden, not to mention a climbing game in the form of Jusant, plus other games that fit within or between these genre buckets. Interestingly, our man Edmond spoke to Dontnod just after the release of Banishers, and they spoke about the fact that they're really comfortable living in that AA space, and they accept the limitations it brings, particularly when it comes to combat in their games, which was an issue for both Vampire and Banishers. Really fascinating interview that we've hosted on our Patreon. It's free to everyone, by the way. It's not behind a paywall, so if you'd like to check it out, I'll leave a link to that below the like button. Speaking of restructuring, Nintendo seems to be doing that too, only this one will result in job losses. Kotaku was reporting that due to a lull in testing activities, Nintendo's testing function will be restructured, with some 120 contract roles being eliminated, though an undisclosed number of contract roles will become permanent positions. Nintendo confirmed the news, saying that this was about better integrating their testing offices, but Kotaku is also reporting that no one has yet got their hands on the Switch 2, and if the reporting about the recent delay of the hardware into 2025 is to be believed, it would make sense that testing doesn't have a huge amount of work to be doing between now and then. More layoffs to report, as always. Smilegate Barcelona has been shuttered. It was an offshoot of Korean-based Smilegate, the developers behind Crossfire. Barcelona was apparently working on a brand new open-world game, but now they're working on nothing, and 40 people are out of the job. Certain Affinity are a support studio that has worked on games including Call of Duty and Halo. Most recently, they were working on a Halo Battle Royale game that got canned despite years of work and a staff of over 100 people working on it. This week, they announced a reduction in headcount of around 25 people, or 10% of their workforce, Certain Affinity citing hostile market conditions for the cuts. Ubisoft just cut 45 people from their Asia-Pacific publishing operations. No more specifics on that. And Sega has just sold Relic Entertainment, the studio behind Company of Heroes and the much-loved Warhammer 40k Dawn of War. That studio will now go independent. At the same time, Sega cut 240 jobs between both Creative Assembly and Sega Hardlight, a disappointing move, but not unexpected after Sega dropped a King's Ransom developing Hyenas, a co-op live service team shooter that was cancelled 6 feet from the finish line. Finally, some quick sales data to finish off. Game of the Year winner It Takes Two has just sold through 16 million units, and that is a co-op game, meaning that at least 32 million people have enjoyed this absolute masterpiece. Love to see it. Except for the elephant scene, of course. Hate to see that. Still wake up in a cold sweat at night 2 years later. Unicorn Overlord has hit a modest but respectable sales milestone of 500,000 units. Not a bad result for a tactical RPG that hasn't even shipped on PC yet. And the most surprising sales figure you'll hear this week is that the PS2 has now officially sold through 160 million units, up from 155 million units the last time Sony provided an update on that figure. This is stunning because who the fuck is selling brand new PS2s in 2024? Where is this inventory coming from? Production for this thing stopped back in 2013. You mean to tell me that scalpers were holding on to inventory for this long in the hopes that it would... And yep, I just checked eBay and they're absolutely correct. I'm seeing brand new PS2s go for 4,000 Australian dollars. So I really wish I bought a spare PS2 back in the day. So what got announced or delayed this week? Well, biggest announcement was certainly Marvel Rivals. We may be getting tired of Marvel movies, but when it comes to games, it feels like that IP is still full of potential, and what better way to tap it than a competitive MOBA? I'm not joking, by the way. I actually think this is a great use of these characters, and I'm actually kind of into this. Marvel Rivals comes from Chinese-based NetEase, and it's a free-to-play 6v6 team shooter MOBA thing that includes a pretty rad roster of characters, including outside picks like Magic, Namor, Penny Parker, and Luna Snow. It features team-up abilities that look pretty fun, as well as environmental destruction, which is not something you often see in this genre. Been a while since we've seen someone take a crack at the third-person MOBA thing, and this looks pretty decent. The response to the reveal has generally been cautious optimism with a healthy dose of skepticism. Always smart when we're talking about a free-to-play offering. No date for release, but the closed alpha begins in May 2024, so we'll no doubt hear more about it then. Speaking of IP licensing, Konami are doing a thing with V Rising, bringing Castlevania-themed content to the game on May 8th, the same day V Rising enters 1.0. The crossover will let you fight Simon Belmont and even Collector's Whip. There is, of course, paid cosmetic DLC to go with that if that's your poison, or garlic, or holy water, or whatever. Metal Hellsinger was a fantastic first-person shooter rhythm game that released a while back to rave reviews. They've just announced a VR port that will arrive for basically every supported VR platform. No date for it yet, but it is sometime this year. Biggest announcement of the week in the Shill Up Work Discord was NCSoft confirming their intent to make Guild Wars 3, with Austin refusing to shut the hell up about it for the rest of the week. NCSoft's CEO casually mentioned in an earnings call that Guild Wars 3 was in development, but much to the chagrin of Austin, he refused to elaborate any further. Given that this is the first time we've heard about it and that MMOs take a fair amount of time to build, we definitely shouldn't expect it anytime soon, but I'll of course keep you posted because Austin will leave me no choice. Nine Souls is a really fantastic feeling 2D platform I played a while ago during a Steam Next Fest. It actually won the Discovery Award at last year's South by Southwest convention in Sydney. This team's been working on it for a while now, but the title finally has a release date, 29th of May, exclusive to Steam. Only one delay announcement this week, and it's for Earthblade, the next thing from Maddie Thorson, the person behind Celeste, now working with an outfit called Extremely OK Games. They confirmed, quote, "This game ain't coming out in 2024, end quote." Thorson has had some medical issues that have slowed progress, but the work continues, with the likes of Carl Pulver, the person behind Super Meat Boy Forever, having just joined the team to help troubleshoot some sticky design problems. Still plenty of reasons to be optimistic about this one. We just need to wait a little longer. Speaking of waiting a little longer, it ain't much, but it's something. This week, Hollow Knight Silksong finally got an Xbox store page listing. What could this mean? Question mark, question mark. Probably absolutely nothing, but those of us huffing that copium will cling to any tidbit we can to keep the dream alive. We're like 2 months away from the Xbox Key 3 showcase at this point, by the way, so if I was a betting man, I'd expect an update then, but hey, anything's possible, right? Right? That's what we have to keep telling ourselves, at least. So what came out last week? Well, Open Roads was that narrative-led road trip game about a mother and a daughter just talking it out. It's from Annapurna Interactive, who usually know a winner when they see it, but reviews for Open Roads are a little more tepid than the label is used to. It's sitting at a fair 74 on OpenCritic. IGN scored it a 6 out of 10, saying, quote, "Pottering through meticulous environments full of kitschy decor was at least enough to keep me entertained for its short runtime. However, with sharp teeth and no bite, I was left hungry for something meatier and more emotionally charged by the time the credits rolled," end quote. PC Gamer were even less impressed, scoring it a 56 and saying, quote, "As Tess and Opal's journey concludes after just 2 hours, the question you may be left with is whether it was worth embarking in the first place. Yes, this is a story that feels relatable in tackling subjects such as grief, abandonment, and regret, but perhaps there's such a thing as too relatable, that is, too ordinary to stand out at all, especially when the telling is ultimately so sentimental," end quote. Pepper Grinder dropped for PC and Switch last week. It's the latest from Devolver Digital, and it had a great run at the most recent Steam Next Fest. Reviews for it are largely positive. It's sitting at a strong 79 on OpenCritic. GameSpot scored it an 8 out of 10, saying, quote, "Every piece from the core drilling mechanic itself to the various ways it manifests with cannons and mechs and more feels meticulously engineered to teach you a new concept, wring the fun out of it, and then move on to the next. That sense of propulsion makes every moment fun and engaging," end quote. The last release for the week was a big surprise, actually. The people who brought us totally accurate Battle Simulator have been working on something else, and on April 1st, they shadow dropped it. For free. 6 million people downloaded it in that 24-hour window, with the title achieving a peak concurrent player count of over 200,000 people. So what is it? Well, it's basically Lethal Company meets Phasmophobia. You and up to 3 buddies unite under the glorious banner of content creation, and each equipped with a camera, you head into dangerous locales to see what shenanigans ensue. It's been out for just over a day at the time of writing, and already this game has completely taken over every social media feed I'm on. It's just straight up funny to see the shit people are coming up with, and everyone seems to be loving it, as the game currently sits at a 96 overwhelmingly positive on Steam. It is a paid product now, but it's super cheap. It's like 10 Australian dollars or whatever, and even if you don't have friends to play it with, it's still just worth watching clips on YouTube or TikTok. So what's coming out this week? A very quiet week indeed, which is definitely what we should be expecting for the next few months, actually. There are a few indie releases this week though, like Biomorph, which is a Hollow Knight inspired hand-drawn Metroidvania. The twist with this one is that enemies will learn new techniques as you revisit old areas, spicing up the backtracking that is a central tenet of many Metroidvanias. This one is exclusive to PC and it's arriving tomorrow. Botney Manor is a first-person gardening game set in a Victorian manor. I included this one because I have a soft spot for Downton Abbey, and I really wish they would have shone more of a light on the groundskeeping stuff, because all that grass would not have cut itself, thank you very much. This seems like the definition of chill, relaxation manifest. It's hitting PC, Switch, and Xbox on the 9th. Biggest release of the week is likely to be Children of the Sun. I've profiled this one a few times now, but it's kind of like Super Hot, except you're a sniper and you control the bullet as it moves from target to target. Love the Next Fest demo for this one. Great art, great sound, great gameplay, great X factor, that thing that Devolver are so good at spotting. This one drops on the 9th, exclusive to PC. Last release of the week is a funny one. Gigantic Rampage Edition launches for all platforms bar the Switch on the 9th. This was a MOBA from years ago that got cancelled and taken offline. Then all of a sudden, Gearbox announced that they were bringing it back, but only for a weekend, which obviously would never have been true, because why would you do that? Obviously that little test was successful enough, and Gearbox greenlit a full re-release of the game. Back in the day, this was free to play, but here it'll be a premium title featuring 23 original characters and all of the original maps, as well as 2 new characters and 2 new maps. Really hoping this one pops off, actually. As I said earlier, it's been a while since anyone's taken a swing at the third-person MOBA thing, and Gigantic was always a really good time. It deserved to have a longer lifespan than it got, so here's hoping this comeback keeps them on the map a lot longer this time around. There were quite a few really impressive indies that were revealed this week, to the point where we struggled to pick one to profile in this segment. We'll come back to the other ones later, but for now, put this on your radar. Meet Screenbound. It's the world's first 5D platformer because according to the developer, 2D plus 3D equals 5D. And yeah, the math checks out. This one is even more difficult to explain than it is to make sense of when you look at it, but basically you move forward and back in 2D and your lateral movements happen in 3D. Combat happens in 2D, but you get your loot in 3D. There's a level editor that lets you make levels in 2D, and it also renders them in 3D while you do that. Did you catch all of that? Because if you did, could you kindly explain it to me? I'm very confused. This one came out of absolutely nowhere and has been doing the rounds as one of the most impressive looking debuts since the Plucky Squire. It's from Crescent Moon Games, there's no release date for it yet, but if you'd like to wishlist it, and I strongly recommend that you do, then I've left a link to it over on my Steam Curator page, which also has links to all of the other Put This On Your Radar stuff I've recently covered. I'll leave a link to all of that below the like button. Sort of free stuff time now, and we are in the first week of the month, which means it's time to load up our trolleys. Pretty spectacular week from Epic Games, actually. Right now you can still get the charming Metroidvania Islets, but later this week you'll be able to get your hands on the 2014 version of Thief. It's not as good as the original, but hey, it's free, so we can't complain too much. You can also get hold, though, of the Outer Worlds Spacer's Choice Edition, the Obsidian-made Fallout in space game that was pretty great, so long as you're willing to accept its limited scope. That package also includes the DLC, which is great DLC, very worthy of your time. Be sure to grab this one before it's gone. The PS Plus lineup for the month has been revealed, and it's a bit of a mixed bag. Headline offering is Immortals of Avium, and you know what? I am glad that this is getting the PS Plus treatment, because this is the moment that many people will experience it and realize that it's fine. It's not particularly great, but nor is it offensively bad. It has some silly MCU-style writing, some over-the-top spectacle, and some mindless action. It's a decent time that was a bit of a piss take at full price, but feels just about right for a subscription service. Take a punt on it, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Outside of that, Minecraft Legends is also available. I liked it, but it's probably a little too tricky for kids and not tricky enough for adults. And finally, there's Skull, the Hero Slayer, a roguelike action platformer that I haven't played, but it's sitting at overwhelmingly positive on Steam with over 40,000 reviews counted, so there must be something to it. Finally, the Game Pass refresh came in as I was just finalizing the script, and it's got some great stuff there too. Lego 2K Drive is probably the headline offering. That's meant to be pretty good if you can avoid the in-game cash stuff. Shadow of the Tomb Raider Definitive Edition is a nice addition as well. That Botney Manor game I mentioned earlier is releasing day one on Game Pass, and the upcoming Harold Halibut will also be a day one release. That one's been on my radar for a long time now, looking fantastic, so be sure to mark your calendars for that one since it drops on the 15th. Alright, it's time for my favorite edition of the feel-good story for the week, the one we get to do after April Fool's Day, because we get to take a look at all the goofy shit that the video games companies put out. Kicking things off is the Pokemon Sleep World Championship, an event that the Pokemon Company spent way too much money trying to convince us was real.
Ready. Trainers are pressing their sleep measurement buttons.
Sleep.
Getting to sleep quickly is key. And someone's already slumbering. Lullababy takes an early lead.
Not to be outdone, Pal World's developers announced a new visual novel where you date the pals. Fair enough, I guess. If KFC can make a dating simulator, then so can these guys. Among Us announced a new game mode that will run for 1 week only. It's the same game, except all the crewmates look like penises. Let's see if that affects the PEGI rating at all. Powerwatch Simulator added a dirtifying mode, which if I'm honest, makes total sense, and I think this should actually ship as a sort of PvP mode, where one person is trying to make everything dirty and the other person is trying to clean it up. I think that would really work. But my favorite of all has got to be CD Projekt Red, who this year announced that the definitive physical edition of Cyberpunk was finally on the way. At last, those of us still rocking a 3.5-inch floppy disk drive will be able to enjoy Cyberpunk, but not before enjoying the installation process, because this thing ships on 97,619 floppy disks. But look how cool they look. Are you going to tell me you wouldn't want one of these discs to use as like a beer coaster or something? I sure would. So CD Projekt Red, if you're listening, let's make this April Fool's gag a reality. There is a chance the CD Projekt Red are listening, because I actually got to catch up with them when I was in Boston recently. In addition to chatting with Ken Levine about Judas, we also chatted with Paul Sasko and Gabe Amantangelo, lead quest director and game director respectively. We chatted with them about what it's like to build a whole new studio in Boston for Cyberpunk 2, and what it's like to be doing that while also trying to make the actual video game. Really fascinating conversation that will go up this week on the channel. You know who else is on this week's episode? Naked Jakey. Jake Baldino is on vacation this week, so we needed a cool, likable New York dude named Jake to fill in, and so Jakey kindly responded. He's co-hosting the whole show this week, and we'll chat to him about his video game content, his music, his life in general, everything. It's going to be really cool. Really stacked episode, so I hope you'll join us either here on YouTube or on podcast platforms. Just search Friends Per Second. Thanks very much for watching the video all the way to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you had a good time, and a big thanks to this week's sponsor, Brilliant. Let me ask you something. You ever feel like you're spending too much time on social media? I certainly do. And sure, I find some cool June 2 memes from time to time, but I also know that I could probably be spending my time more wisely. So to spice things up, I signed up to this video's sponsor, Brilliant. If you haven't heard of them before, they provide really accessible, really interactive ways to learn about things like science, mathematics, engineering, computer science, and more. They have courses big and small, simple and in-depth, all of them illuminating something that seemed at first impenetrable, but really you just needed someone to explain it to you properly, or you needed to learn by doing, which is another thing that Brilliant excels at, since its courses almost always contain some interactive element that lets you apply and test your learning on the spot. What makes it really great is that they have a mobile app, and all of their courses have been formatted to be delivered through mobile. The courses are always really well structured and broken down into manageable chunks, and they actually gamify your learning, giving you experience points and achievements for completing courses, and gradually upping the complexity as you get more proficient in a topic. So now, at least once a day, I boot up Brilliant, chip away at a course, learn something new, and I know that I've fed my brain something more useful. It's like doing a mini gym workout, but for your brain. This stuff isn't just interesting, mind you, it can also be really useful. If you work in data programming, then the stuff you learn here can help you be better at your job, and just having a sharper, more curious mind is going to hold you in good stead no matter what you're doing. Lately, I've been doing a course on large language models, or LLMs. These are the things that power most of the AI tools that have popped up, and regardless of what you think about AI, it's really useful to at least understand how that technology works, because it's probably going to have a pretty big impact on our lives in the future. If you're interested, you can try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days by visiting brilliant.org/skillup, or click the link in the description below. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription if you click that link. That's brilliant.org/skillup. Thanks Brilliant for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.